Good morning and good Yom Tov. I think it's the 15th of Av. So we're in Ayin Beis. Essentially, we're now around 100 pages from the end, and we've been reviewing the last 127, 130 pages, even though we learned it, but now informed by the bigger picture as we learned based on the source material in the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, namely Mikra Hashem Elokeinu, Hamagbi L'Sheves, Mashpili Lires B'Shamayim V'Aretz. So we are on page 1378. There are some sections I have skipped over or just briefly summarized because the goal here is not so much to learn everything in the original text as we did the first time around. That's all documented and recorded. So you could check that out in our archive of Ayin Beis previous classes, which goes back all the way, frankly, to the beginning of Ayin Beis, but especially this section. But being that now we are more informed, as I said, by the Maimorim of the Mittler Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and other materials, and we're learning it a second time around, there's no question that we can learn to appreciate many sections that the first time maybe were not fully understood the context or why the Rebbe Rashab was elaborating. So we're in the middle of essentially what Torah is. It's the best way to describe it. Torah, as he began on page 1350, to explain the interface between the divine existence, Mamata Lamaila. After Mamata Lamaila comes Mamata Lamata from the top down, and that's through Torah, primarily through Torah. So the discussion has been here about Torah, and Torah is called Torah, an illuminating Torah. Torah from the word Hera, directive, guidance, instruction manual. But it illuminates. And what does it illuminate with? The truth. The absolute, clear, crystallized truth, as he kept using the words Chochma Brura, from Chochmei Law. So we live in a world where we can't always see what the truth is. And that's why we're blessed with minds that probe and evaluate and discover and dissect the entire, what we call the scientific process. It's not just limited to science, it's limited to every body of knowledge is about that. A knowledge creates awareness. That's why knowledge is compared to light. Without knowledge, you're in the dark. With knowledge, you become more aware. The question is, how aware can you become? How conscious can you become of the truth? How, you can make 80%, 90%, 5%, 10%. Being that we're given Torah as a gift, Torah, God's wisdom, meaning the architect, the engineer of existence, the cosmic engineer is giving us essentially his book, his manual that he used to create the world. So there you have the total clarity about everything you need to know in life. Now, this, of course, includes the Torah itself saying at times, the Torah says, we give him permission for a doctor to heal. In other words, the Torah and God have given permission for scientists and for medicine people, and people, men of medicine, women of medicine, people in the medical field or other fields of scientific fields. We were given intelligence to be able to figure things out. So the Torah is not going to tell you how to perform heart surgery or how to do different diagnostics, but it is all included in God's plan and God's design. Here's not the place to go into the distinction between Torah in wisdom and scientific wisdom. We've talked about it other times. Here we're talking about Torah wisdom, and that Chochmei Law is what radiates and illuminates, and the language he's using here, and brings birur, clarity, in a place of there no clarity, or lack of clarity, or there can be mistakes. And where's that place? That's where Bina operates. So Bina is the second faculty after Chachma that comes to bring the clarity of Chachma into an area where you need to bring that clarity, because Chachma has that clarity on its own. And how do you bring that clarity? That's through the evaluation and through the deep immersion and contemplation on any given topic that you ask questions and you probe and you challenge and you argue and counter argue, and that's the process of finding that clarity. Chachma Bina. So you want to have the joining of Chachma and Bina, the clarity of Chachma to be brought through Bina into a world where there is no clarity, or the word, the way he put it here, from Atzilus into Biyah. In Atzilus, there's that total clarity. It's Alakus. There's no other way of looking at things. Everything is divine. They're seen through the lens of the divine. But in the world of Biyah, that's where we need that clarity. And Biyah goes, of course, level after level, all the way down to Asiya Gashmis and Chumis, which is our world, as we've been discussing at length. And then the Rebbe Rashab continued on page 1377, which leads us into where we are now. This is the difference between Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, which now breaks down the Torah into different parts. Torah Shebiksav compared to Chochmah, Torah Shebal Peh compared to Bina. Or, as we've been learning it now, in Mishnah, Chochmah Tata of Malchus, which obviously is coming also through Bina, but point being is that the goal that in Mikra, there you have the total clarity, but you not necessarily have anything explained. You don't have details, and you don't have the reasons, and you don't have the explanations. Things are very brief, as he put it. So the Mishnah is what elaborates and brings it down, what he calls the Chagas of Moichim, the Chagas of the Midas of Chachmah. They come down into Chachmah Tata of Torah Shebal Peh. And they bring that clarity. So till the time of the Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, that clarity, Ish Mepish, was there. We haven't yet gotten to Talmud. Keep that in mind. So we're still middle of Mikra and Mishnah, essentially. Though we've learned it earlier, but now we know it in the language of Chachmah and Bina, or Chachmah Ilah and Chachmah Tata. And that's the last paragraph that we learned on page 1378, where he discusses why it goes down, how it goes down to Chachmah Nafkas. It comes from Chachmah and is drawn down through the Midas in a state of Gili, because that's what the Mishnah does, the Hirah of Torah, that indicates and tells us Mavdil between Chesed and Gvura, between Teva and Ra, between what's right, what is wrong, what is permitted, what is not permitted, what is pure, what is impure. And that's the Shisha Midas, the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 sections of Mishnah. Breaks down further, 6 times 10, 60 tractates, Shishim Mesechtes, and the time of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, there were 600 Sidrei Mishnah. So it breaks down even further, 6 times 10 times 10, ending up being 600. And this is bringing down the Chachma-Birur of Torah into a world where it's not, where it needs to be clarified. As he explained, that's why Mishnah is called Malkusa, like a king that decrees and says, this is right, this is wrong, this is kosher, this is not kosher, and the Torah tells us what you could elevate and transform into godliness and what you have to stay away from. Basically, the laws of what the to-dos and not do's, and not to-dos that the Torah teaches us. Okay. I'm just reviewing the paragraph here. This is the birur that nasa b'keich ha'teira, birur momayl lamato, hayde era chachma sheb'keich levar ben tevera. So it clarifies, it separates, and is able to distinguish in a world of confusion, or further, a world of actual deception. He calls it armumius. Like Lov and Arami, someone with intelligence can see through that deception. Someone who may not can be deceived. So the goal is to be able to see through the darkness, through the cloud, through the fog. The Kudah said emes, like that was the role, that was what Yaakov did when he was able to be mevar the birurim, find that clarity by his uncle Lavan Ha'arami. Okay, the Ri of Chachma. And that's the Amiti Sinyan V'Teira Er, because Eira emes Shemeir Es HaCheshach. The Torah Eir, the true Torah Eir, is that it radiates, not just in a world of light, but it illuminates in a world of darkness. Darkness meaning where we don't have clarity. And Eir Hazel b'Torah Shebiksav, Baba Gil b'Torah Shebapeh, b'Masnisa Malkus, Gezer v'Eimer. Yeah, because in Torah Shebiksav, Leibol calls that b'Gili b'Dibur b'Derech Prat. And in the Midas of Chachmat Hatov, Torah Shebapeh, it comes out revealed in detail like the spoken word, not just as it is in thought, that distinguishes between between Tuma and Tara and Issa v'Heter. That's a summary of what we learned until now. And again, this is learning it on a second time review, again, informed by the bigger picture. So next paragraph, he goes a little more detail. I was debating within myself whether we should learn this paragraph or not. Obviously, it's always good to learn everything. That's not my that's not my consideration. I'm just saying in the context of how we're learning Ayin Beis now. I decided let's go through it. We don't have to go through every line literally, but I will go through this paragraph because at the time when we learned it the first time, this paragraph was like an addition that I wasn't so sure about what it's adding. Now I think we can figure out what the Rebbe Rashabi is adding. But you see clearly it's a thorough analysis, a thorough overview of what Torah is, Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. As I said, we're still in the world of Mikra and Mishnah, and that's critical because in Talmud we really get into the world of darkness. Even though the Mishnah does bring Torah into a world of lack of clarity, even a world of deception, but it's still, remember, radiating Mamay Lamata from Torah, from the Chochmei law that was passed on Ish Mipi. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh was in a direct link. He had teachers that he knew, that he learned with, who had teachers in turn, and it was an unbroken chain straight from Moshe. That's what they have. But then, of course, we need to deal with a situation where you don't have that type of clarity, which we'll get to. That's the next paragraph on next page, after the one we're going to learn now, where he goes back to Talmud. So we'll get to that when we go there. So now he says like this. New paragraph on page 1378. Pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. It says, in this birur itself, meaning the birur, the clarity that Torah provides and offers us, he says, Yesh b'zeh b'chinas pnimi u'b'chinas makif, u'b'chinas makif l'makif. In other words, as I remember, I did explain it when we learned it the first time, but I'll just say a few words about this. In Chassidic terminology, in the Chassidic lexicon, so to speak, the dictionary offers all kinds of words that you don't find in the regular, usual vocabulary of day-to-day routine conversations. So one way to identify the structure, the cosmic structure of existence, and including our lives, is the context of Pnimi, Makif, and then Makif lemakif. Just to give an example, it talks in Chassidus about the three primary needs that a human being has: Mazon, Levush, Bayis. Food, sustenance we need to have. Levush is garments to protect us from the weather, from the elements. And three, Bayis, a home, shelter. And Chassidus explains that these three is Pnimi, Mazon, because you digest it. You digest it. Levush is a Makif, but it's called a Makif HaKarev. Why? Because it's a Makif. You don't ingest it. You don't digest it, you wear it, but it's tailored to your body. One person has one size garment, another size. Bayis is called a makif of a makif. Because in a bayis, you look at a home, you can't tell who's living in there, because the bayis is not necessarily tailored to the individual size of the individuals, people living there. You could have one person living in a mansion. You could have a whole family living in a shack. Point being is bias is called makif harochik, or what he's calling here makif lemakif. So essentially, it's like describing existence in the language of, is it a pnimi, is it a makif, is it a makif lemakif? To give an example in mitzvahs. So the mitzvah of tzitzis, for example, the tzitzis themselves, the strands of tzitzis is considered to be pnimi, because each one is an individual strand. But the garment of the talis, the garment of the tzitzis, is a makif. I understand that tzitzis is not internalized like food, but relatively speaking, a sukkah is a makif. We sit inside of a sukkah. Even a makif lemakif. Lulav and esrig v'lekachtem lachem, we take it to our hearts. Same thing with tefillin is a pnimi compared to talis. In tefillin itself, a tefillin shalosh is more makif. Tefillin shel yad, because it corresponds to the heart, meaning it's closer to our chest, so to speak. It's considered a Pnimi. So wherever you look in Torah mitzvahs, you'll find there are mitzvahs that are connected to Pnimi, mitzvahs connected to Makif, and mitzvahs connected to Makif of Makif. Just as an overview of what these terms mean. Of course, it connects as well. This is why I'm saying it. The whole theme of Ayin Beis begins, if you recall, mentioning several times, the three levels of Kesser, the three meanings and the three dimensions of Kesser. Kesser is a Makif. But in the Makif itself, he speaks about three levels. The Makif that relates to Atzilus, the Pnimim. Then you have, in Kesser, you have a Makif that's removed, and a Makif that's completely removed. So I'm not sure if this is what he's referring to when he speaks about it here, but very likely there is a connection between it because it's very similar. Like in every interface, you have always three things, 1, 2, and the third that combines them. So let's now learn inside, just as a small overview of what these words mean. So now, yesh b'zeh, in the process of the birur of Torah, there's b'bchinas pnimi, b'chinas makel, b'chinas makel. U'kumei b'meichel shenepach l'dam. B'chai is b'lev ha'moyach. Shezeh b'chinas naran. So it's going to be a little brief here. The Rebbe Rashab, I'll elaborate just to explain. Like when you take a food, Michael is a food. So when you ingest a food and then you begin the digestion process, what's happening? The food is being broken down, its nutrients by the body's digestive system to ultimately turn into blood, expel the waste, turn to blood, the chayis b'lev ha'moyach, to the blood within the heart, and chayis, and the vitality. The vitality in the heart and the mind. Shazeo b'chinas naran. That's naran. That's a pnimi. So in the levels of neshama, when we speak of the 5 names and 5 dimensions of neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chay, yechida. So naran is generally pnimim. Nefesh being nihi, ruach being the midas chagas, and neshama connected to Chabad. That's Keiches Pnimim. That's the internal faculties. Then you have Chaya as a Makif, and Yechida as a Makif to a Makif. So he's saying that's the first. So in the process of digestion, which is a very good example in general of Birur, because what happens when you eat a piece of food? Besides the fact that the food has to be worthy, a healthy piece of food, but the food alone doesn't immediately sustain you. It has to be nisbared. It needs to be broken down. First of all, broken down by eliminating the waste and retaining the nutrients that ultimately turn to blood. But also the very food itself is broken down. The teeth break down the food into small parts. So it's a process of birur. Achila is a process of birur. So it's a good physical example of what birur is about. It says, V'chelek hatev v'kosher shebemechalim yalu l'kedusha. Like he spoke earlier, what does the Torah tell us? It tells us what's kosher, what's not kosher. It's basically telling us that the good part and the kosher part in the foods, that will be elevated to kedusha, like in the human being, the nutrients will become part of your flesh and blood. They will sustain you. Because what the strength that he gains from the food that he eats, the kosher food, yizba libe, it sates the heart, and it strengthens his mind and his das. So the food ultimately, besides strengthening the physical body, now allows this person to serve God in peace and in a healthy way, because it strengthens him. So it strengthens Aveda in Tefillah. He calls Ava V'yira Mesiris Nefesh in Shema. B'chol libe, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha is essentially b'chol libe, b'chol v'nafshe u'me'odei. U'be'esek hatera. I believe this is a language from Tanya, if I recall correctly. And in Asik, in the immersion, in the Asik, the immersion involvement in learning Torah. U'kamaimer, like we say, ad lo yachilna. Psara the Torah, v'chamra v'recha pikchin. Till he did not eat psara the Torah, that is, Torah is sher, the meat, meaning a rich meat coming from a bull, from a cow. chamra b'reicha pikhin, and the chamra and the taste and the smell of the wine, pikhin sharpens his mind. So it's a Maimar Chazal that tells you how the food sharpens a person to be able to learn Torah and do Aveda properly. Ubezeh gufa birur hu b'tchias hara sheb'meichel v'netilas nitzus tev sha'idei achila b'kavana l'shem shemayim. And he breaks it down further. The birur consists of two parts. One is eliminating the waste, like we learned before. That birur consists of eliminating sig, pselis, any doubts, any questions, any mistakes, and so on. So that is removing the tchiyas hara, pushing aside the negative stuff, the waste within the food. And the second part, the netilas nitzutz. This is my grandson, just I hope you don't mind. Can't really. He feels like he wants to participate in the learning here. So, the netilas nitzutz satev. And gathering or drawing the good spark, the holy spark, the healthy spark. So exactly what you do when you eat a food and how you properly digest it by expelling the waste and retaining the nutrients, the same as beruchnius. But when it comes to a meichel aser, a food that is prohibited, something we're not allowed to eat. Even though technically speaking, it too can be transformed into blood and vitality that sustains a person. But however, the Torah tells us, through this will not be any aliyah to Kedusha. And that's what the Torah is distinguishing between something that's allowed, something that's not allowed. Adarabah, mastir al era neshama ha'elokis. The contrary, it will cover up on the divine soul that the person has. This he discusses in chapter 6 and 7 in Tanya. Sefer Shalbeinim. Okay, so what he's essentially spelling out here is, in very practical terms, what does the birur of Torah accomplish? This is the birur. Here's now another example. V'chein gezel, v'mekach hamemka. So the Torah prohibits stealing from any person in the process of doing business with them. In other words, if a person there's an ethical way, masa matam ba'amuna, an ethical way to do business, then the money that you use and you make from that business deal will elevate to kedusha. But gezel, if somebody makes a profit or makes money through gezel, so he says, lo yalu l'mayla. Just a second. 1 minute. I misplaced something here. Okay, anyway. So if it does person by gezel, God forbid, lo yalu l'mayla, shekol yegia kapov, because everything that the yegia kapov is the toil of a person's hands. We say the sweat of your brow, but yegia kapov are the hands, are the palms. So shekol yegia kapov tzarich ben nekoyin min hara. That all our work basically that we do has to be pure, clean from things that are ra. And gezel, of course, is ra. The gam philose ta'ava. This is actually from the Haftarah that we said before Tisha B'Av. That when a person, the Eibishter says there, what do I need your karbonos and your prayers if you're stealing from someone? That dissonance is very disturbing to God. And that's where the Churban Beis Hamikdash, God said, I don't need your tefillos and karbonos. Tefillos tova, your tefillos are an abomination for me, he says. It's a very sharp expression. Your hands are filled with blood. Like he says there, you're hurting people. He talks about the almona, the widow, the orphan. So if you're not a just human being, you're not being virtuous, you're not being kind, what do I need your tefillah for? Which tells you, the Torah is telling us that that all that you cannot elevate something to kedusha with the blood on your hands, basically, in a way that's prohibited. That's the clarity the Torah tells us. That's a birur that the Torah provides us. V'chein lulav hagozelu posel. And same idea is with a lulav hagozelu. If someone steals a lulav that does not belong to them and uses it, it's posel. You can't use it. You can't do a mitzvah through an aveda, basically. So that is what he just gave the examples of. Achila is a pnimi. I'm not sure. Gezel, it's not clear to me whether it's a pnimi, because the next one he's going to talk about levush. That's a makif. But bottom line, he's showing us that the Torah is in all areas of life. Pnimi, makif, and makif lemakif. The Torah is giving us direction and clarity. I'm not sure about Gzela. The Michael for sure is Pnimi. Gezel, not sure. Maybe we'll have to analyze that. But then he says like this: V'kach b'levush kishatnus ukai gav. Same thing. The Torah also gives us laws when it comes to something in the area of garments, like the garment shatnus, linen and wool. The Torah tells us you're not supposed to mix the two and use that as a garment, even though it can keep you warm and it serves as a physical garment. But the birur of Torah says that is not, you can't be ma'ila to kedusha, because for the different reasons Kabbalah, Chassidus, and Halacha explains that you don't mix these two worlds. Ukahai gavna. Again, the reason I think the Rebbe Rashab is emphasizing here these different levels of birur is because he's coming to explain how the Torah affects all parts of life. Remember, the whole theme here is the interface. Just 1 second, everybody. Just 1 second. Okay, good. So he's trying to emphasize here how the Torah remember, we're learning about the interface between the divine and existence. So he wants to show how every aspect of existence, the Torah gives us clarity. I think that is the main reason he's spelling out this paragraph about Pnimi and Makif. So he's shown so far Michael, talked about Gzela, now we talked about Levush. The parentheses, I'll just read quickly. He talks more about Levushim. He says, I am Ashkos Mokamacha Be'inin Levushim, Sheneschatro Adechet Tzadas. Next page, 1379. That before Chet Tzadas, there was no Levush. Because it says Adam and Eve were both naked. They were not embarrassed because there was nothing to be embarrassed about. Everything was pure Kedusha. So the whole concept of Levushim is something that came due to the Chet Tzadas. The truth is, this requires a whole explanation, which I did give when we learned it the first time. So I'm not going to go over it again. I would just recommend, if you want to know more details about this, I would check out how we learned it when we learned this piece the first time around. But what I'll say briefly is that the Chet Tzadas changed human consciousness to the point that they started feeling their own entity, themselves, as a certain self-consciousness, which is exactly why they suddenly recognized that they were naked. Like a newborn child, for example, or a young child is not conscious of it at all because there's nothing wrong with being naked. It's just a part of a person's life. God created the human body. Every part of it is sacred. Every part of it is creating the divine image. So the Chet Tzadas, he's basically saying the whole concept of Levushim is a birur, is because of birur, because it's connected to the Levushim of Chochmah, the clip of Seichel Anushi, Hagoshes Hagashmis, that you sense the Gashmis, and therefore you need a garment to protect. You need a garment to conceal the more intimate parts of a person, because we have fallen and our consciousness can be very crude and very inappropriate. So the levush is a way of recognizing and respecting boundaries and so on, as explained in detail, as I said back when I first taught this idea. The Adam and Chava, they were completely aligned to God's wisdom and God's clarity. It was not like they had their own self-consciousness. So the physical was simply existing like a container that contains life, like a body that is the vehicle for the soul. But there was no focus on it. It wasn't tefes mokum, therefore they didn't sense it. So it's like a person who's completely immersed in what they should be doing. There's no sense of something that there's anything inappropriate. This also explains why the Nevi'im, when they prophesied, often they would strip themselves, which sounds weird, strange, but that's one of the reasons, because levushim is when you're conscious, and they were in a state, like it says by Shaul, that he too undressed, stripped himself, and he prophesied. That's from the take of Advekus and Alakus. The reason he's bringing this is because he wants to explain how levushim, the very concept of a levush is a birur. And as I said before the chet tzadas, or someone who's in a level that's higher than birur, you don't need to have that clarity. So therefore, the whole purpose of levush is not there. Obviously, we are not on that level. I mean, no one can just claim, so when you have, I remember I once gave a class, and someone asked me about a nudist colony. I know, quite bizarre, but I explained to them that's we're living in a world where no, people are not on this level before chet tzadas. That's why there's a mitzvah to dress the garments, tznius, a kohen gadol wears special garments. Even in the Beis Hamikdash, which you say is the Holy of Holies, you think is this highest level. It's not. You have to be in a particular level of a novi or in a very particular state to be able to achieve this level.
Can you take a question?
Let me finish the paragraph, then I'll take questions. I'm especially going very quickly here because I don't want to digress, because it's really not so relevant to the central theme. It's interesting stuff, but I would recommend, again, listening to the class. But I'll take questions after. Let me finish the parentheses. She says, spiritually, it's not about physical garments. It's about removing the garments of thought, speech, and action of this world, where a person is able to become so connected to the pure light that they don't need any garments of thought, speech, and action. Garments became the garment industry was born, and it became a primary function. So you need the levushim because of the world being on a lower level. I see that. 1 second. Let me just see here. The parentheses goes quite far, actually, all the way to L'Kovdil Teferes. So I'm going to read it quickly, and then I'll stop for questions. Then we'll go to the third level, Makif of Makif, which is a bias. So, okay. Isa, he says elsewhere, the Rebbe Rashab says, the levushim hein lefnei zor, that the whole concept of garments is only before a stranger. The la'atzmei ain't tzarich levushim. Person on their own doesn't need garments. She says this is consistent with what we just learned, because in a state of complete solitary state, where you're not impacted by the world around you and by people around you, like he says, with all like before Etzadas, so then it's a state where garments are not necessary, because garments is again interacting with a world that does not have birur, does not have clarity, a corrupt world. Like he explains in Tanya, that the ovis were like a vehicle, a merkava. They're all their So he says in Tanya that the Ovis were Merkava, and he says these words, all their Evarim, meaning their entire body, from head to toe, were Kadeshim or Muvdalim, were holy and separate, Minyane Elam, completely a vehicle to godliness. Everything was in a level of Kedusha. And yet they did wear garments, just for the record. I think he may refer to it, but regardless, he says, Avram v'Sara Yitzchok v'Rivka hem b'chinas ma'aban k'meshkos mokemachet. Avram and Sarah, and same thing, Yitzchok and Rivka, were the level of ma'aban, meaning completely divine entities, the level of Elikus, of Shem Ma and Shem Ban. So even Shem Ban is still a name of Hashem, Yudke Vavke, in the milui of Hayin, which makes it Ban. But Kolsh came by Adam Arishan Kedem Achet. And for sure, Adam Arishan, before the sin, Sheyesh by Yisr Ma'ila Shayitzir Kapav Shal Kadosh Baruch. He was even on a higher level because he was actually created, the very body of Adam. The others were children of human beings. They all had parents. Adam, his very body, God, Vayitzer Hashem Elikim es Gufa, he took the piece of earth and he shaped Adam. So Adam was Yitzir Kapav, that was a whole other level. That's what it says elsewhere. And when there's something strange, some alien entity contaminated the world, that's when levush was necessary. Now the truth is, even with Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov, and even the others, they wore garments because they did not live in a world before Eitz Hadas. So they themselves were on that level. But the fact is they were not alone. They lived in a big world around them. The truth is, he says now, even before the chet, he also had a garment, but it was a different type of garment. Kasnus Eir, the Aleph. It says Kasnus Eir is a shirt of light. Eir can be spelled with an ayin, a shirt of flesh. Eir, like skin. Eir can be spelled with an aleph. Eir. So it says before Eitz Hadas, Adam had a garment, but it was a garment that was completely transparent. It was made of light. Ba'aleph. These are the levushim of Chachma of Kedusha, not Chachma of Klippa. The Chachma b'chinas levush, the zeh shachachma nika kovid b'gematri lamed beis kaneda. The lamed beis nesivus Chachma, the 32 paths of Chachma. So Chachma is a levush, but it could be a levush that is a levush for the negative. That's already after Chet Eitz Hadas, or it's a levush is for the positive. Kovid hu levush u'kamoi Rabbi Yehuda koreh lemone machbudusa. Like Rabbi Yehuda, he called his garment his honor. So you see, a garment is connected to kovid. It could be kovid of kedusha, or it could be not of kedusha. You cannot have appreciation, comprehension of it itself only through chachma. You need the levush of chachma. I'm ashkosabel kutetera shu b'chinas levush umezeu sheresh alevushim dekayin gadol shehem lekovid u'leseferes. And this is the root of the garments of the high priests that were what their purpose was: lekovid, kovid, honor, and teferes and beauty. And that's the parentheses. So the parentheses is, it's never, nothing is a digression, nothing is a tangent, but it's not necessarily in the central theme that we're learning here. That's why I'm not really elaborating. I just didn't want to skip it completely, because it does have relevance in the context of how the Torah affects also levushim. So the fact is, in other words, there is a levush even before Chet Eitz Hadas, he concludes, but it's a very different type of garment. Not a garment of birur, because it's already made of light. Whereas the garments after Chet Eitz Hadas, they need birur. So a law like shatnez, for example, is only shaykh after Chet Eitz Hadas. You don't have that law beforehand because there were no garments beforehand. To make something a linen wool is already a garment that came after Chet Eitz Hadas. Okay, so now we covered levush. Then finally he's going to cover Beis, which is the Makif to a Makif. So we have now mitzvahs that relate to Pnimi, Michael. We have mitzvahs relate to levush that he's been talking about now. And there's the final piece about Beis, which is going to be Makif LaMakif. But if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And I'll probably refer you, if you're going to get into too much detail in this parentheses, I will refer you to what we learned earlier. But anyway, just in case, if something I can answer quickly or provide some clarity, I'm happy to do so. So please take it away.
So I have a question, and you may say it does not relate directly to the mimer. I mean, it's what he just wrote, but and if you want to say we'll talk about it after the recording or some other whatever, that's fine. But I just wanted to ask the Inyan of Adam and Chava having to wear clothes after the Chet Eitz Hadas because that's when they realized they were naked. Prior to that, they essentially didn't have self-awareness of their own of frankly their own materiality, and they were also following God's will. There was really it was a place where there was only in accordance with God's will. There really was no sin, as we understand it, in Gan Eden, and yet, and after the Chet, there was sin, and there was more free choice. That's how they gain knowledge of good and evil. So the question is, doesn't this suggest that humanity itself wasn't really created until after the Chet Eitz Hadas? That somewhere before that is more like a behemoth. I don't want to say that human beings are behemoth, but like a behemoth, an animal just follows its will, its nature, the way God created it.
No, the answer is absolutely not. Listen, they had free will and they ate from the tree of knowledge. Animals did not transgress.
Mm-hmm.
So the mere
but
fact
something about that moment,
the fact is, even though they were created that way, but you see, it didn't take long when God said to them, "Do not eat from the tree of knowledge," and they did. So you could ask, how did they if they were so pure? That's another discussion. But they clearly did transgress, and that means they had free will, and animals and the rest of the creation did not.
We're not now, but where would it? Is there a famous mimer that talks about how could they make the wrong choice? Like
there are some mimerim. I've talked about it in a number of classes of mine in more detail.
Okay, I'll follow up with you
separately. I probably discussed it when we learned it the first time in Ayin Beis. I don't think I went quickly through this parentheses. I think I went into detail.
Yes.
And I probably elaborated on it all. And I've discussed it in other classes as well. Probably easy to find by search. There's a mimer in Tofresh Pei Daled Atamat Vekim. And there's a few places where it's discussed.
Thank you.
Atamat Vekim Tofresh Pei Daled from the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's a mimer
that talks about it. It's Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan have a calling Lemane Nechabduso.
Yeah. Okay. Correct. Stand corrected. Right. Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah. So the mimer of Atamat Vekim. There's also, it's quoted in a sikha from the Rebbe Miketz Tov Shemem Zayin. L'kutei Sichos Chelik Chaf Hey, volume 25, and the Esophes Miketz Tov Shemem Zayin. He brings that mimer and discusses it a bit. So there are some mimer in Ayin Beis as well. He talks about the matzav before, the difference between before Chet Eitz Hadas and after. I specifically did not go into it, even though in the bigger picture it is relevant because Chet Eitz Hadas is the beginning of Birurim. To be honest, that's where Birurim begin. So that's why it's relevant to the bigger picture. But this parentheses is so that's why I went through this quickly. But I think enough. I don't think we need to elaborate more as far as the context of Ayin Beis goes. I'm not saying 100%. This deserves plenty of discussion. I'm saying context of Ayin Beis, I think suffices to say it is Birurim, and that's most likely why he's elaborating a bit about it, relatively speaking. The Birurim, that like before Chet Eitz Hadas in a sense was a level of Chochmah, Ilah. And after Chet Hadas, you have to bring that Chochmah into a world of Levushim. He doesn't say those words, but it sounds very much that's what is talking about. So let me just finish the end of the paragraph. So let's get this paragraph done with. Are there any other questions? Okay, so then he says now, the third level is Makif of Makif, bias. V'chein bebias. So we also find Torah halacha that creates birur in the world of Beis. Shetzrichim likfoya mezuzah. So you have the mitzvah of mezuzah. Mezuzah is a mitzvah of the Beis, meaning a person in the street, even though some had a custom to walk with a mezuzah, but the mitzvah is v'ksavtem mezuzah al beisecha v'sharecha. It's connected to the home. So you're supposed to l'kveya mezuzah to establish l'kveya to affix a mezuzah. Umavur b'malkem acher shezeu yin b'chol me'idecha b'chol me'meincha. Now this is connected to b'chol me'idecha, which the Gemara says b'chol me'meincha, with all your belongings or all your money. What's the connection? Because the mezuzah indicates that everything in the house you are dedicating to God. So yes, a mitzvah has a mezuzah has the concept of shmira, of protection. But what its real significance is that when you walk into your home, you walk out of your home, you're saying my home is completely dedicated to batel elokus. So the Torah is telling us, in other words, like he said before about Michael, what food can you elevate and transform and be mavader, clarify, and bring God's truth into this world? Kosher food, not an unkosher food. Same thing with levush. What levushim can you wear? Which levushim you don't wear? And now he's saying a bias as well. There's the mitzvah that a bias should have a mezuzah, which means that how do you elevate your home to godliness? One of the ways is through a mezuzah. And what's the birur? In other words, birur tevara. What's the opposite? Like by food, there's the kosher food, the non-kosher food. That which is possible, that which is kosher. What is it by garment or by lulav? Like he said, gozel, a lulav that belongs to you or something stolen. By garments, shatnez, or clothing that is allowed. So by bias, he says the opposite of a bias. The mezuzah is the bias that is dedicated to Avodah Zarah, God forbid, a house of worship, a house of idol worship, I should say. Shenev the Avodah Zarah. So you see here that the Torah, I believe that this piece must be from the Mittler Rebbe somewhere. I have to find it. I'm almost sure that it's from a mimer somewhere. So I know it just came to me. I have to look for it. Okay. Anyway, bottom line is we see here that in the Birur, Pnimi, Makif, and Makif L'Makif, the Torah is clearly telling us details. Now, for all this, Mikra tells you in brief, but it's in Mishnah where this comes alive in all detail of all these halachas. And now he sums it all up back to what we began with. That all this birur, in actuality, how do you do this birur? If you just read Torah Shebiksav, you'll have the basic mitzvahs. The Torah Shebiksav will tell you what's kosher, what's not kosher, put a mezuzah on, don't wear shatnez, but not the details of it. But Pil Mamish, if you want to have this birur, you need to have, comes from the Helam Legili and Torah Shabbat Peh, that reveals that which is hidden or alluded to in the written Torah. Like he said before about Masnisa Malchus, or why it's compared to a king or queen, because the king passes legislation, laws, decrees. The same thing here, it brings the Gzaru Psak Din Lamaisa. The Gzaru Psak Din that's written in the Torah Shebiksav is brought to Maisa Abisori Hamalucha from the ministers of the king, the ministers of the kingdom. Shazo Bigzedus Hamelach B'Chachmoser Rusene. This is coming. Then the ministers are just carrying it and explaining it and passing it on to the people. But where does it originate come from? It's the Gzedus Hamelach, is the decree of the king, B'Chachmoser, with his wisdom. Who decided a mezuzah is a mezuzah? Who decided don't wear shatnez? That this is kosher, this is not kosher. That's all coming from Gzedus Hamelach B'Chachmoser V'Ritzene, his wisdom and his will. But who passes it on? Who carries it, and who who announces it and declares it to the people, to the subjects of the king? That's the Sari HaMelucha, the ministers. It tells elsewhere that the ministers are the ones that reveal the Ratzon HaMelech to the people, to the nation. So he's comparing now, he's adding one point that Torah Sheba'al Peh is like Sari Amalucha, whereas Torah Sheba'Ksav is like the Melech himself making the Gzeres. So yes, so indeed, you have the Tanoim and all the Bali Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Tanoim and all their teachers, all the way back to Moshe. These are the people who are teaching us what Hashem said at Har Sinai to Moshe, that was passed on to Yeshua and then taught to the people. But what is being passed on? Not their own ideas. They're just ish mipi ish. They're just carrying what the Torah tells us, and with the explanations that were given at Sinai, like we said before, Klalisel, Pratisel, Nemera, Messinai, the details were also passed on at Sinai. And that's why the sages are called the name Sarim, call them ministers. Why? Like Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai said, I am like a minister before the king, a minister in others before God. Which means like we learned earlier, they are the builders, but also the children. All of them are called limudei havaya. They're the teachers of God. Shemekablim b'shem havaya. They receive from the Shem Havaya, is Medayik, Shem Havaya, the Mudei Havaya, Shebetera Shebeksav, they receive from Shem Havaya in the written Torah, Val Yodam Nechtach, Kol Dvar Malchus, Lemaisa Bepel Mamish. And through them, they basically, Nechtach means literally cuts up. They essentially allocate or break down, maybe the right word. They break down that which comes from the king, from Havaya, called Dvar Malchus Lemaisa Bepel Mamish. Called Dvar Malchus meaning the word of the Melech, the king, like you said before. Lemaisa Bepel Mamish, they bring it down. Lemaisa, what an action, how it is an actionable plan, how you can implement it in real life. So the addition of this paragraph is essentially that it affects all aspects of life. Makif, Pnimi, Makif, and Makif of Makif. That's the main addition. But he brings it back now to Torah Sheba'al Peh, Mishnah. The next paragraph is going to get into Gemara. Amnam beGemara he taimi ha-Mishnah. So we're going to now learn what happens the next generation, after the Tanoim, after Rabbeinu HaKadosh compiled and documented it all in Mishnayos. That's what we learn here today. I'll stop here. Good place to stop. End of this paragraph. Any questions? Okay. So let's stop here. End of the paragraph, page 1379. And a little more than halfway down the page. End of the paragraph. Let's stop there.